Hi, welcome everybody to the MemSQL Developer Livestream. Today we're going to work on building out some Vue components. There we go. Okay, so we've started out with our application and we've gotten it to a pretty good spot. We have a product catalog where we can come in and view products, click into the details of those products. We have an admin site where we can do some CRUD on those products, where we can open up a product and change all the properties. We've gotten a request to specifically change the JSON properties. Last week we worked on the API for this. Today let's build out the Vue component that will allow us to edit JSON properties on these products. So each property has a name and a value, and that name can be anything, and the value can be anything as well. In this case, we've assumed that that value is a string because we're entering it into a text box. But ultimately, we need to be able to add new properties. We need to delete properties, rename properties, and their values. So let's build out this control. I think what's going to be really cool about this is that we can build out this control using Storybook. Storybook will allow us to kind of host the control in an interesting way and allow us to start to poke at it and get a feel for how it works. So let's dive in. So we've got our database going. We may not get to the point where we're using it here, but it's great. First step then is to view, add, Vuetify Storybook, grab Storybook View Router, and in this case we also grabbed Fort Awesome, Font Awesome free. All of those I've installed previously so that we've already got all of that component ready to go. And then here in the admin section, I did an npm run build and or npm run serve rather, and we still get these errors, which are really annoying. Ugh, that is awful. So I popped open this, and it turns out that Cypress types conflict with Jest types. So that's kind of a bummer there. Here in the tsconfig, if we remove the Cypress types, then we'll be good. But now we don't have the Cypress types when we're doing end-to-end testing. So I come into this tsconfig, and I'll include the Cypress types not as types, but rather as code. And here's that comment that gets us there, which is really cool. So here's that, where is it? There it is. Here's that comment that says, here in the tsconfig, remove the Cypress and add in the Cypress types. Another solution that they talk about, which is pretty cool, is to disable skip libcheck. I think I'm going to opt away from that. There's also an open PR that will remove the conflicting types, which is really interesting. But let's do that. Let's pull out the Cypress types and just include the Cypress types this way. And npm run serve. So it'll take a minute to build all the things. The other issue right here is this, this.valid. Here in our component, views, product detail view. Right now we're saying this.valid, and that's because we grabbed this from the source coming out of the tutorial on the site, but then we renamed this part form valid. So you're right, this.valid doesn't exist. Let's change that to form valid. Now that we've got form valid, now I think we'll have this ready to go, and we won't have those build fails. That's cool. On the API side, we did a bunch of testing, or we did a bunch of interesting things, and then now that we have our tests that are part of this, when we go to npm run start, it's actually going to fail because it builds and then it tries to run, but what it's running isn't what we expect. If we pop open here into the API and we look into the dist folder, the dist folder isn't just the source folder anymore. It has both the source and the test folder. And that's because we have some things in here that compile into JavaScript as well. Now we could sprinkle tsconfigs around, and that might get us back to having this just be source. But let's pop open this package JSON. Not that. Let's open up this package JSON with code, and let's go modify that. So instead of just running dist/index, we'll run dist/src/index. That's cool. So now when we npm run start, now this one will start up as well. So now we've got both of the pieces back to running. That's perfect. We did the npm install to get Storybook and all of its dependencies into our main application. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is we did a bunch with Storybook previously, where we looked at integrating Storybook in all of the places. So let's just diff our app, let's diff our app project and our admin project and take a look at those Storybook specific things and take a look at what we can do. So add on here in the decorator, what's interesting is it's pulling in the material design icons. That's interesting, but in this project we chose to use Font Awesome instead. So let's head off to Google and we'll go look for Font Awesome. I'm failing. And let's go look for Font Awesome. And the text that we need is right here. Here's that Font Awesome import. So specifically, we'll need Font Awesome free. So we'll also npm install this. And so here in package JSON, we see that we have Font Awesome free. Now, as we pulled in Vuetify, it actually pulled in Font Awesome for us. So this is a little bit redundant there, but that's totally fine. Here, let's also grab the two Storybook pieces, both Storybook serve and Storybook build. And I like the idea that in our other project, we said when I run lint, also fix. So that's cool. Are there any differences? Well, we have some different versions. That's really interesting. One of the things that we can do to update our project is we can run npm check -u. npm check, I have this tool installed globally. We could also run npx npm check. And what npm check will do is go look through all of our dependencies and grab out the pieces that we need to, or rather go identify all of the projects that are outdated. And so to this, we could say, well, I want to upgrade this one and this one and this one. And we can just kind of go through. I won't go through that now because npm install will definitely kill the stream. But maybe off camera, I'll go and update all the dependencies in all three projects. But we've got this part of Storybook set in place. Now, Storybook by default puts the stories inside the Storybook folder. We'd rather have the stories out here. So let's move that folder. Admin, Storybook, stories will come out of that folder. Let's refresh again. We do need a tsconfig.json, and in this case, this tsconfig is probably completely sufficient. Let's copy that into place. Webpack config also needs some updates. We need to be able to pull in our TypeScript files, load with tsloader, and push the new extensions in place. So let's copy that side into place. Let's copy that side into place. And I don't know why I can't remove Sass loader. We're not using Sass in this case, but Storybook really wants Sass. Okay. Here in our stories folder, the error story, the loading story, the not found story, that probably works out of the box. Let's copy those into place. Here in our, do we have other things that we need to grab? Let's diff the tsconfig. Ooh. Let's also take this Cypress fix and move that into place in our app. We're going to go the other direction, but that's totally fine. Here's that piece that will exclude that error. Cool. So we have now a bunch of stories. Let's npm run storybook serve and see what we get. We do have some JavaScript stories and some TypeScript stories, so this may get ugly. Let's compress this. We'll open up our stories. This example stories.js probably is doing pretty much nothing right now. That's totally fine. How's that build? Okay, so Storybook, nope, localhost 6006. Nope, it's not up yet. Build, 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 build. Actually, while we're right here, I'm just going to yank that old example story. Let's just call that done. Anything else that we need to grab from the old project? We don't have any unit tests in this admin project yet. That's interesting. End-to-end tests, it could be interesting to pull in these end-to-end tests when we get there. But we'll leave that for now. Stories, source. We have some differences in each of the pieces, but I'm not super worried about those. Related to Vuex, likely. I think we're probably good. Okay, building the storybook. Go, 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 go. This is awesome. It's always interesting when the other one runs up too. Okay, so while that's building, we've talked about the Cypress fail. Our goal is to build a custom component. And in particular, we want to talk about data binding into this custom component because we want to pass in the properties object on our product and bind that to the content. So this is kind of an interesting custom input component. Let's build one of those, and that'll kind of give us a feel for, can we use Storybook to create these custom components. Custom input.view. Now we could start with anything. I'm just going to copy the error component, both because it has props and because it's TypeScript. Let's set that in place. And here on the custom component, the component that we were pulling in had a value. So let's grab a value component, a value prop rather. And in this case, we'll just say the value is of type string, and yes, it's required. And here we'll say custom input, and then rather than all of this, let's just go grab the content out of this template. We want an input that is bound in all of the ways. Now what this input is going to do is when there's a change on the value prop coming in, it will send that into this input. And if there's any change on this input, it'll trigger this event that will send up the new value. So that's how we do this custom bind on this custom input. So here in stories, I'm going to create a new file, custom input.stories.ts. And now that we've got this custom input stories, let's start with that error again. Custom input stories. Now, instead of error, I'm going to say this is custom input. Perfect. With knobs, that's perfect. Now, in this case, instead of passing in status and all the things, I will say vModel equals data. And that data then can be one of these, and it will be of type text. Now, one of the things that we want to check is to see if the data changes. Now, this custom input is interesting. Let's do this. Div. Now we have our custom input. Let's do a line break. And then let's dump out data. Now, this isn't part of our component, so technically this is a little bit weird, but it's great for debugging this Storybook. And so now as we pull up our Storybook view, let's see if we get our custom component that will do that data binding back and forth. So here's a custom input. Now we can type things here. Ooh, it is coming out here. And if we change our things here, then it goes back in. We can see that we have that, it's not two-way data binding, but we do have that two-way experience between these two controls. That's perfect. So that's exactly what we're looking for here in our properties editor. And so here we've got this input, and we're ready to go. I'm going to pull up my notes just in case. Let's move these over here. Okay, so we've proven that Storybook is a great way to start experimenting with these controls. Let's see if we can experiment with a control about binding these custom inputs. So arguably we can now delete this custom input, but just in case we need to refer to it again, let's leave that in place. We want to create a new component where we can pass in the object and get back and data bind to it using viewModel. So let's create a new file, and this will be properties.view. And this properties.view will be really similar to that custom input where we have the value coming in, and we're able to loop through the content and do interesting things. So let's start here with custom input. Copy custom input here into properties. Now in this case, the value is of type object. But Vue doesn't really, or TypeScript really doesn't like object. Rather, it likes row of string, not that, not row, record. Oh, nope, let's leave it as object. It will be required, and we won't have a default value. But now here in this thing, let's flip that from an object to an array. So I'm going to create a data here, and this data will return. Actually, yeah, data is initialized. Let's leave it here. This will return an object, and let's say entries. And entries will be of type, well, let's just say name value. Let's go invent this type. as property data. Properties data? Okay, so export type properties data equals, we'll have an entries that will be of type name value array. Now let's go create that name value. Export type name value equals, it will have a name that is a string. It will have a value that is a string. And so that we have something to bind to, let's give it an index that is a number. So now we've got our data. It is this name value array. Well, it is of type name value array. It's an empty array right now. And now let's create a methods. Let's create a method that will take the data passed in and turn it into this entries array. So create compute entries. This will take in an object, a val that is of type object. And now here in computing entries, we can do some interesting things. Let's say const entries equals object.entries. Now object.entries will go return all of the keys and values. And we want to map that. Let's say here's our entity and here's our index. Now it is an array where it's the string and the value. And we want to map that into our object. So let's say return name is entry 0, value is entry 1, and index is I. Cool. So if we wanted to, we could shorten this a smidge to be like this. And now we've mapped all of our entries into this thing. And now entries is of type name value array. Am I missing a closing paren? Yes, I am. Okay. Actually, let's back that out a little bit so that we can be more specific here and say this is const row equals this, and our row is of type name value. Cool. We could do a as syntax, but I kind of like that it's going to validate that these values are passed correctly. Okay, so we have our entries. Now let's say this.entries equals entries. Cool. If we wanted to shorten this, we could just say this.entries straight away. Perfect. So this will take the object coming in and convert it into this array that we can then bind. Now we do want to do this on mounted, and to say this.compute entries for this.value. And we may want to do it a couple more times depending on how this works. We also don't want to do it on watch. Cool, we've got all of the places. For watch, we're going to watch value, and it's going to pass in the new val. And that's interesting, but we don't want to just watch the object. We want to deep watch the object. So we can build a thing like this where we can actually watch differently. So this is handler that takes in that new val that is of type object. And inside this handler, we can say this dot compute entries new val. Cool. So on mounted, let's do it once. And anytime that object changes, let's recompute it again. Now we have this entries array. Now we could have just created a computed property, and that's interesting. But the difference here is we want to be able to manipulate that data. And so by creating a separate data object, we can bind to that separate data object. And then when we're ready, we can publish those changes off to the calling component. Cool. So now instead of this input, let's say this is a C properties ul liv for row in entries li ul, nope, the other ul. Okay, so now we need a key equals row.index. Now we could have keyed off row.name because that was unique, but we're also going to mutate the row.name and thus the index. Now let's do something interesting like row.name, row.value. Okay, we've just bound those two things. This is still read-only, but this component is good enough that we can start to take that for a test drive here inside Storybook. So here, let's create a new story. New file, properties.stories.ts. Now here inside properties.stories.ts, let's start with this custom component because that got us pretty far. Instead of custom input, we'll say properties. Let's replace all the places. Great. Now it is taking in a vModel. And so perhaps calling this model might be a better way to do this. And this isn't text, rather it's an object. Has JSON. And let's bind that model down here as well, just so that we can see it go. Let's fire up Storybook and take a look at how our component is doing. Here's properties. We have that data going in. Here's our properties object with the vModel, but it's not displaying anything. Where did we fall down? Well, let's come back in here and take a look at our properties component. And let's just bind value. I'll put it inside of an H1 so that we can see that we're binding that content. Not there. There. We also may need to restart Storybook so it can pick up the new component. Let's actually do that. Not there. Restart Storybook. npm run Storybook serve, and we'll get a fresh call that will grab all of the components. We also may see a compile fail, and maybe that's why we don't have our property loading correctly. Did we get anything in the console? Ooh. Looked for value and got undefined. That's interesting. Data is not defined. Ooh, I see where we fell off. We renamed things and didn't rename them consistently. Let's close a few things. Close all. We want properties.stories and we want properties.view. Here in properties.stories, we renamed this from data to model. Everywhere but there. That would definitely do it. That's quite the fail. Okay. There we go. Now we've got our JSON and we've got our array here. That's cool. So if we come in here to our knobs and we say more JSON, ooh, it renders 2 rows. That's perfect. So we've solved the problem of getting data in. We can remove then our test code of just dumping out the values. We probably want to do something like, I don't know, v-card. That will give us a little bit more visual distinction in our component. Now it's kind of in that box, which is really elegant. Let's give our box a title. Let's call it h2 properties. Now, arguably, this styling piece might be best in an external component, but I think it works here. Let's create a container, v-container, and inside that container, rather than, and then this is a v-row for the title. That's perfect. And then we'll have another row here for each thing. So rather than doing an li and a ul, let's do this. v-row. Okay. So now we have a row for each entry. That's perfect. In this case, let's do a paragraph just so that we can see it. Ooh, that's shaping up to look pretty cool. I think I missed some attributes here on the v-call though. Oh, yes. v-call, calls equals 12. v-call, that works. And then here inside each row, I will create a v-call, calls equals, well, let's say 6, but for medium, let's say it's 4. Here in this first column, let's do row.name /v-call, v-call. Here we'll do row.value v-call. And this one will be calls equals 6, and for medium, we'll make it 8. So you have more space to edit the value if your screen is bigger. Okay, that works out nicely. We've got that separation there. Now, instead of them being just dumping, let's go back to that input type equals text. And probably we'll want to go look for an input that is Vuetify specific. So let's come into Vuetify and we'll look at UI components. And we've got this text, where is it? In forms. Forms. We have a text field. So text field, in this case, it's just a regular text field. We could do outlines. Ooh, regular looks like it could work. Let's go grab that. So regular, v-text field label is regular, placeholder. v-text field label is regular, placeholder is name. And v-model equals row.name. And now we should have an editor. Yes. Cool. Let's do that same editor on the other side. Now this is the value. Row.value. Ooh, that's cool. Now I do want a way to add new rows and delete rows. Let's actually come in here and make this dense equals true. That'll make it a little bit shorter. Not so vertically tall. There we go. That's a little bit denser. We do want to make it required. So actually, let's come back to required. Let's first work on putting the icon here so that I can delete the row and then add a new row. So in the text field, I can do things like this, where I can add icons and put icons in the middle and do interesting things like that. We did this exact trick for our passwords, which was pretty cool. Now there is a thing to say template, not that one. Slot append outer. Oh, there's that watch one. Nope. There's a way here inside the text field to do slots rather than just icons. And so let's actually do that. So here in this second one, I'm going to say template, and this is v-slot append outer. And that will make it outside the thing, outside the text box rather. And let's do a v-icon. Color equals, well, let's go for a red color. Here's a good red color, right there. And what's our icon? Let's go back to Font Awesome and go pick an icon. This time circle looks like a good choice. So let's go grab that code. Now we won't need the eye. All we need is this inner spot, the inner text there. There's a V icon. Cool. Back in Storybook. Ooh, that looks awesome. We've got this delete icon. It doesn't do anything yet. We haven't built out that. Let's build that next. So I want to say, if you click this, then let's delete row. And I'm going to say click.prevent so that it doesn't actually like submit the form and do stuff. It will just run this function and then be done. Okay, delete row. So we have a compute entries. Let's say delete row. This row is a name value. And let's say, oops, this.entries equals this.entries.filter R for row. R doesn't equal row. Well, that'll probably be perfect, but if, let's look at the index. Just in case we have some kind of, object doesn't quite align something or other. Okay, so we've got these entries. Come back to Storybook. And if I now delete a row, oh, do I need to refresh? Is it still building? I think it might have just finished. Ooh, that looks really ugly. Render methods should be pure functions. Okay, so now if I click the delete button, ooh, I may have failed completely. Yes, we crashed. Where did we fall off? This.entries, this.entries.filter. Actually, I bet it's not going to work unless I do this. Delete row of row. Let's see if that gets us unstuck. It does not. And it's not data binding either. Let's back that out a second. We also may be hitting our wall on time, and so we'll have to come back to this next week. I think this is really cool, though. We're starting to get some cool data binding experiences here inside of Storybook, and that allows us to do some really cool things. Nope, we're still getting a cannot update during an existing state transition. So it was working. Let's back this out. Let's back this out. I think that's the last spot where we had it running. Is that going to save us? No. Undo all the things. Undo all the things. Dense is true. Is that where we fell off? I don't think so. I think with dense true, it was still running. Let's double check. We may also need a new browser window. Oh, I bet it's still building. Nope, it built. Render method should be a pure function. That is weird. Well, let's press ahead. I've got this delete. Oh, haha. There we go. So I've got delete. We also want to have an add. So let's create another new row, v row. And here in this, let's say v call, calls equals 12. And so we have our plus button. Let's add, or we have our delete button rather. Let's add an add button. So this will add row. And now let's go after an add control. So we've got close. Let's say plus. Ooh, this one looks like it works. The plus button looks really similar to the delete button. Let's also style it green like we've got here though. There's the add button. And the color, let's go with this color. Cool. There's our plus button. Sweet. Oh, we don't have an add row function. Let's go create an add row function. Add row takes in nothing. Now first we need to say max index. Let's go after that and then say this.entries.push add row. Add row will be of type name value. And here we'll have name is blank, value is blank, and index is max index plus 1. So max index. How do we get the max index? That's where this is really interesting. How do we compute the maximum value out of a thing? I think this looks cool. There's also a way to do it with a data reduce, but I think this is really sweet. So let's say math.max. What is our array to search? This.entries.map. We have a row and we have a row.index. And the cool thing is if we don't have any entries, this spread operator will do exactly nothing, and this 0 will be our default value. We're going to look for the max value there. So there's our max index. And so now we have our max index gives us here the new index for this new row. And now if we delete a whole bunch of rows, it's not like we're just doing the index. We'll ensure that this index is unique. That is perfect. So we've got our button, and our button will do stuff. We can bind stuff to here. This delete button will delete a row. That is perfect. Now we're not telling the parent component about anything yet, so we'll need to do that. We also need to tell it, hey, this is invalid, this is required. So let's hammer on that. First, let's get this right aligned. That's going to be really easy. Right align all the things. Here in our column, we can say text right. A built-in helper with Vuetify, which is perfect. Oh, cool. Now the button is there. These are required. Let's build a required validation. Now here inside Vuetify, when we're looking at text fields, validation. There we go. Validation. Hint. Validation. So here's the thing. Let's go look at the code there. Ooh, rules.required. Rules.required just says, hey, I've got some, they just created a nested object, but I have some function called required that takes in a value and returns the message or false. That's cool. Let's go build that. So I'm going to build a function here. We've got add row, we've got delete row, required. Now this takes in a val that is of type string, and it returns Boolean or string. So return not val. If val is true, it will continue on. If val is false, then we'll get this message that says value required. Perfect. We've got our required function. So now let's say here in these fields, our rules equals quote required. Now we put this colon in front of it because now it's just binding to this text. We want to actually programmatically bind to it. And so we're not passing in a specific literal value. We're passing in that function. Now, why did we do it here? Well, here we don't want it to be the string true, the letters true, but rather we want it to be the constant true. And so that's why we put the colon here. Okay. So back in our component, has JSON. I can add a new row. Ooh, it's not picking up there we go. It's picking up the validation right there. It's required. Well, I probably need a thing in my system that can keep track of that required state. So let's start talking about how do we tell the calling component that something happened. So we're computing entries. We're taking the value prop and turning it into an array and doing all the things. When these things change, we probably need to inform the thing that something happened. So let's create a thing called entries changed. Whenever something changes, we'll do this dot. What was that syntax again? Back here in our component, they're doing an emit on input. Okay. So we're going to pass in a different value, but this dot emit input, what is the new value? Well, let's say compute value. We'll go invent that. What is compute value? Well, this process takes the entries and makes it into a value. Compute value can take the array and turn it back into an object. Okay, compute entries. So we want to do object.fromEntries. Now object.fromEntries assumes that it's that array. So let's take this .entries.map, and we want to take that row and turn it into an array. So here's row.name, row.value. Now we have that that object array that fromEntries expects. In the case of a blank value, let's decide that that's okay. And now we have our object. Return. Wow, that's a voodoo method. Our goal is to code for legibility, and in this case, we're not really explaining what we're doing. So let's unpack this a little bit. Const entries equals, and this will map name value to object entries. And then this will map back to object. Cool, that made it a little bit more discoverable. Next time we come through this code, we'll understand what that's doing. So now when we compute this value, we'll get back an object, and we can go tell the calling component that this changed. That's cool. Let's take that for a test drive. Here is our component. Has some stuff. Okay. Well, we're not calling that yet. Let's go call entries changed. Now we want to call entries changed on, I don't know, anytime these text fields change. Okay, so let's go look at those text fields. We have a v model. Let's also say v-on, or we can just go at input equals, let's do v-on just in case. Entries changed. Let's do that in both places, and if that works, then we'll flip it over to the at. Okay, so our component, ooh, our parent is getting the results of these changes. That's cool. How about when we add a row? Ooh, it's getting the new row. How about when we delete a row? Nope. Okay, so when we delete a row, we also need to compute changes. So delete row, and then this dot compute changes. Oh, this dot entries changed. Now we can tell that calling component. We probably don't want to tell the calling component, don't tell parent value changed. We probably don't want to do this when we add because, well, when we go to grab the name, it's going to get to be nothing, and that'll just be ugly. Let's not. Okay, so we have this component. When we delete a row, yes, we've deleted the row. That's really cool. Well, one of the things that we want to do is block the save when this is not valid, and right now it's not valid. So let's go create a mechanism for explaining whether this is valid. So let's say when entries change, this dot $emit valid, this dot compute valid. Is it valid? Well, what does valid mean? Compute valid. Well, compute valid means that all of the objects in the all of the entries have a valid name. Okay. So const entries, const invalid equals entries.filter. I want to find any row where the name is blank. Let's get the length of those. So now I know that if this is 0, then everything's valid, and if it's not 0, everything's fine. Okay. So return invalid count equals 0. Invalid rows. Okay. So if I don't have any invalid rows, I know that it's valid. That's cool. So here I'm telling it, true or false, is it valid or not valid? When we add a row, we know that it's not valid anymore, so let's just emit valid false. Perfect. Back in our story, let's take a look at this, and we will say, well, I want to bind to valid. Well, this valid here, let me go dig into my notes. Valid.sync. Ooh. This sync mechanism is a cool way to do data binding. Now, not that. Did I close sync? I believe it's here in this page, but sync is this really elegant mechanism where I can do two-way data binding. Now, it presumes that there's a prop going in, but it will also pass that data back out. So let's say I've got this valid, which is default Boolean valid true, and it really doesn't matter. I'm not going to use, not that one. I'm not going to, thank you VS Code, control dot. I'm not going to use this anywhere, but this makes it a really elegant interface to be able to, or I'm not going to set it, but it's an elegant interface where I can be able to take a look at that. Now I'm setting it here by emitting it as valid, but let's also document it here in the properties. Value and valid. This is of type Boolean, and default value will be true. I'm going to say if you don't pass it, that's fine. And so now, because I'm emitting this, it's not just that I'm emitting valid, but rather that I'm emitting update valid. And that's that two-way data binding mechanism. That's cool. So anytime anything changes, if I'm deleting a row, or if I'm adding a row, or if I'm changing any of the text in the rows, I will update this entries changed, which then will propagate up to my parent component, and I can see that content. Let's go back into our story and see if we can expose the, pardon me, see if we can expose this. So we've updated our model, or we've outed our model. Let's also output valid. Cool, so valid is true, and here's our model. I'm going to remove this. Ooh, valid is true, model is... It looks like value isn't required anymore. Let's remove that rule. And it also looks like we're not grabbing the changed element quite right. Refresh. Has JSON, that's perfect. Add a new row, it's still valid. And so I don't think that's working quite right. Let's go reach into the oven and diff it and see how we're doing. Admin, source, components, properties. Did I name it something different? Oh, haha, refresh. There we go. Properties. This is slightly different, but that's just because I've, oh, yes. Dot prevent. That's perfect. We move things around. Compute entries. Compute valid, entries changed. Delete row, add row. I think that's pretty close. So that's interesting that I'm not getting the valid update here. Oh. Let's go double check the story. Types, stories, vModel. Oh, haha, yes, it's not an event. It's a property. Silly me. That is the solution to that one. Okay, so we've got some data as we add a new row. Now it is not valid. Once we give it a name, now it is valid, even with a blank value, and the blank value is fine. I can delete that component and that will come back out and it is still valid. Delete all of them and it's still valid, and now my model is blank. Let's go add some has data. Oops. Not sure how I got the auto expanded view, but that's fine. Value, that is perfect. Now recall we created a regular expression validation around this name. Let's see if we can go find that. We did that in the API, and I don't believe we exposed it to the app at all. Here inside the API, inside source, inside routes. Oh, we actually put it in types, product. Let's diff this product definition against our API's product definition, source, types, product, compare. There we go. Product code regex and product property regex. We'll probably need both of those. Okay. So now our validation is required and valid. Valid characters. So let's go create a valid characters regular expression. Required valid characters. This will take in a val that is a string, and it will return Boolean or string. So we want to say if not val, then it's fine. Return if not val, so this will say turn this true into false and then true, or this. So if we don't have a value, it's true, and we're totally fine. Yep, our job is not to validate that it exists, but rather our job is to validate. Let's import. So return this property.regex test val. Now we could also overcome the blank thing like this, or use only A to Z, 0 to 9, or dash. I think that's our regular expression. Let's import property regex. Thank you, VS Code. VS Code, come show me the regex. Yep, A to Z, 0 to 9, and dash. So no spaces. Oh, product property regex, we did allow spaces. So I think use only A to Z, 0 to 9, dash, and space. Cool. Can't compile? I suspect we can't compile because we hadn't finished. Ooh, can't find module types product. Ah, yes. Let's give it a more direct path. Let's go ... src. Let's start over. ... types / product. There we go. There's a more direct route to that. I'm not sure if this tsconfig understands what at means. Refresh. Okay, so has invalid. Avoid mutating a prop directly since the value will be overwritten. Yes, I know. So it's still valid, but now if I start using funky characters, ooh, so I need to tie into the validation from this object as well. So not only am I looking for valid, but I'm also looking for property regex.test valid e.name. And so to some degree, we've just kind of replicated. It returns a Boolean. Yes. Oh, row. We've just replicated the validation. We could just call those other two methods every time. I could go back and forth. Required row.name and Valid characters, row.name. Yeah, I think that looks a little cleaner. Typing is hard. This dot. Okay. So valid is false. Ooh, and valid is still false. That is interesting. I think we might have a regex fail. I'll definitely take that offline. But so far, it looks like our component is doing pretty good. So we were able to do some really interesting things today. We used Storybook to create a harness for our component, and we started exploring how to build that component inside Storybook. We did some really cool things there where we did some v-model binding, passing events in, or passing events back out, passing properties back out, passing a model in. It was really cool to be able to interactively debug this inside